It is a pleasure to worship with you today. I had a discovery right about the time I was invited to join you. The first line of the 23rd Psalm came to my mind, and I was just stopped by it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not want. The realm of desires and attachments is my domain right now, both in my own spiritual development and as I finish my training to be a spiritual director. What does it mean that I shall not want? That this state is connected to God being my shepherd? I knew immediately that I needed to explore this with you. A word about the text itself. I started with the translation in the Jewish Study Bible and dug into the Hebrew for some of the words. The greatest challenge I had was pronouns. I kept the pronoun he, not because God is gendered male, but because of the metaphor in the text, and because my heart allowed it. I pray this is not a stumbling block for you. The 23rd Psalm is the second scripture I ever memorized, right after the 100th Psalm. Until recently, though, this scripture never felt personal. It always felt like it was meant for someone else. It's a true spiritual temptation to feel responsible for yourself, right down to your salvation and system of meaning. But in a flash, all the baggage I had built up around this scripture, the male language, the submissive nature of the text, my lack of confidence in its message, it just melted away. The key for my heart's understanding, the key that I offer you today, is that of obedience. Not obedience to human systems and authorities, but to that basic heart's plea, thy will be done. Why I have resisted this message for so long is a mystery, and I pray you will be more receptive. Let us begin. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Here are two statements, and I like to imagine that David, a poet with real-life experience of being a shepherd, sang this first. We have two statements together, and in true Hebrew fashion, there are no conjunctions to explain, like, if the Lord is my shepherd, then I shall not want. These two truths are attached, and it's left to our hearts to construct meaning. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I dug into that first verb, to want, I shall not want. There aren't a lot of words in Hebrew, so each serves multiple functions, and this one can mean a simple desire for a physical thing, or deep spiritual longing, or a lack that leads to death. We live in societies that are drowning in want. We thrive on comparison and inequality, and we practice desiring more and more. We practice dissatisfaction. We are really good at wanting, and it is exhausting. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be exhausted. It is both a promise and a covenant. Let's take a moment and breathe deeply into that feeling of not wanting, that feeling of peace and satisfaction. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. The rub comes. Can I really be a sheep? Can I be led even to pleasant places? My shepherd knows what I need before I need it. And of course, I am free to walk off a cliff for spite. I'm free to straggle, to learn slowly, to prance around instead of resting. I'm free to forget. He makes me, he causes me to lie down in green pastures. It's another spiritual temptation to be efficient, to produce, to become goal-oriented, and resting does not seem to tick those boxes. How interesting that rest should be the first example in our instruction. It is as if God whispers, I really meant what I said about Sabbath. Do you notice? This is not an active sentence. I lie down in green pastures. Nope, God does it for us. And sometimes we need to be caused to lie down, just as overtired children need coaching into bed. Yet how do our souls feel when we finally rest? How open are our eyes, and how soft are our hearts? The few times I've allowed myself to experience it, it has been as delicious as the grandest unitive experience, and it calls me forward in spiritual practice. He leads me beside still waters. I'm a sheep. It's not safe for me to drink from rushing rivers. I'm top-heavy, and I'm likely to fall in. Or maybe I balk at rushing water. It's overwhelming. But once again, God knows what I need and provides it. Again, there's obedience. I am led to still waters. He restores my soul. Again, true rest. This Hebrew word for soul, nephesh. It can also mean breath or even life. He restores my breath. He restores my life. What does this restoration look like? What state are we re-entering? The lesson I have to learn again and again is that I am not alone. When I feel alone, usually under stress, the first thing I lose is my breath. It gets shallow, high, so quiet. It also feels dark and isolated, like Jonah in the whale. I feel carried away by the currents in my life. My soul feels thin and flat, with echoes of connection, but no ability to tap into that current feeling. This pattern emerges often, and it's frustrating that I still often see it only in hindsight. Every time it happens, I've been playing shepherd with my life instead of sheep. When times of deep restoring have come, they have been quiet times. Usually I drink from those still waters when I'm away from home, on retreat, away from my fast, multitasking pace. Often I have wise mentors around me who help me remember that I don't need to produce my own wisdom, just as I don't need to produce my own green pastures or still waters. They are there. They really are. And I can follow, keeping that restorative silence alive within. He guides me by right paths, as befits his name. In this culminating statement that draws together all of the promises above, God's own name is on the line. A wise shepherd doesn't take foolish risks for the sheep, and neither does God put us in jeopardy. Following God in righteous ways somehow reflects on God's character. My need of these paths is reflected in God's desire for my growth. Though I walk through a valley of darkness, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This is only the second time in the whole passage that I am the subject, that I do something. So am I on this dark path through my choices or through following God? And isn't that the question? The answer is both. The more I learn to listen to people, the more I realize that the dark path is very common and sometimes lasts a long time. I learn that dark places can be both places of stagnation and places of fallow growth. Sometimes it's depression, but sometimes the dark night of the soul. I first learned this passage as the valley of the shadow of death, and it feels like a death to lose the light of consolation. My experience with God's character strengthens my belief that God does not lead us into a fruitless depression. But I have felt God's presence somehow in experiences of the void, of emptiness and darkness, and those experiences have led me to growth and joy. We fear no harm. You are with us. You abide with us. This next part is intriguing. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I've spent my life trying to get it right, and when I get it wrong, to fix it before I need correcting. The shepherd's rod and staff are tools of protection and correction, to hook me out of the river when I fall in, to push me back when I'm too close to the edge, and to separate me from danger. My natural inclination is to resist correction, even to get defensive and justify myself. But this passage shows me the comfort that exists in correction. There is a connection between being close to God and being corrected. If my ego is too weak to accept that I need to learn and change, then I once again lose my creaturely status and I masquerade as a creator. I dress up as a shepherd. You spread a table before me in full view of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. The initial context for this scripture may well have been the Babylonian exile, when the Hebrew people actually lived in the presence of their enemies. I learned the truth of it at concert receptions. Even when I was hungry and thirsty, I would not eat as I mingled with the audience after performing in a show. It didn't feel safe, as if it were a place of judgment. So just like an animal at a water hole, I waited until the coast was clear and I was home before meeting those needs. God prepares our table in full view of our enemies. And we don't need to wait until it's safe to meet our needs, because God is right there. You anoint my head with oil, both preparing me for responsibility and healing my wounds. My cup runs over. I am filled so full that there is no holding back, no saving for tomorrow. The excess flows into the world around me, and I am a vessel of God's love, freely shared. Only goodness and steadfast love shall pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Pursue. That verb often means danger, to be hunted and followed. In this context, it is the assurance that God's most tender love is magnetically attracted to us. God's own goodness seeks us. If we have fear left in our hearts, we can simply stop our running and let our hearts turn toward the love that is already seeking us. When our willingness to live in sacred community exceeds our natural fear of spiritual and relational transformation, we will become who we are called to be. Let's listen once more to this wisdom from section 164. When our willingness to live in sacred community exceeds our natural fear of spiritual and relational transformation, we will become who we are called to be, and we shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This house is not only a place, as those exiles in Babylon knew. It is the kinship of God, the dominion where Shalom and Zion meet. It is a place of peace and satisfaction, and of striving for the good and the just. In this context, forever is comforting, and it carries sacred echoes of connection and renewal and being seen and known. This passage is full of natural elements: sheep, water, grass, oil, darkness, food. Yet it speaks to the transformation of our whole selves. We gather together to do more than feel good. Yet this passage shows us how good it can feel to see ourselves truly as created creatures who have a shepherd, who knows our name. If we try to be our own shepherd, our yoke and our burdens will be very heavy. But if obedience is not a light yoke for you today, I pray you will follow your desires to find God and tune your heart even more to listen to that still small voice who accompanies us into every path we enter. May God bless you and feed your soul.